To talk about the P-39 Aircobra, and more specifically, I'm going to talk about it through the eyes of Edwards Park in his book Nanette, which is the only book I know coming out of World War II that really shows how the P-39 Aircobra was used in the Pacific. Edward Parks grew up in New England, where he had a pretty standard upbringing. I believe his father was was a deacon in a church, and was raised up in New England. Was initially a pacifist, but as the war got closer, he was eventually drafted into the army. Ended up as an engineer, not like a real engineer, but as an engineer soldier, and then saw a flight of P-40s coming in 1941, and as soon as he could, thought, wow, that looks pretty neat, and it's better than digging a ditch, and got into the Air Cadet program, and eventually got himself assigned to a P-39, and ended up out in the Pacific with the 41st Fighter Squadron, which was part of the 35th Group. The 35th Fighter Group had, of course, fought in the Philippines. A few of its pilots and crew members were able to escape in B-17s all the way down to Australia, where they reassembled the group with new pilots and new planes. One of the new planes that they equipped the group with was, of course, the P-39. By the time Edward Parks got there, the 35th Group had a squadron of P-38s. It had a squadron of P-40s, and it had a squadron of P-39s. The models of the P-39s that were flown by the squadron started off the P-400s, which were, of course, the export version of the P-39 that we had originally supplied to Britain, which they did not want. So a large group of the P-39/P-400s ended up in Australia. They were offered to Australians who did not want them. They wanted the P-40. And so American pilots flew them in the South Pacific. The model that Edward Parks flew was the P-39N model, and which was the most up-to-date model at this time, and he's pretty proud of flying it. Actually, while he was flying in New Guinea, I believe he flew every single model of the P-39, but he was one of the few pilots in the squadron that had the ratings to fly the P-39N. So he started to fly number 74, the 74 plane in his squadron, in his group, was the P-39N, serial number unknown. And he flies this for quite a long time. For the first few months that he was in combat in the South Pacific, always flying out of New Guinea. He says, the P-39 had all the drawbacks that everybody else says, but, it couldn't fly very high, it couldn't fly very fast, and, of course, it was lugging around a 37mm cannon, weighing a little bit over 200 pounds in its nose, so that was 200 more pounds of armament than a standard aircraft fighter plane would carry at the time. So all these things affected the P-39's performance. The P-39, of course, had a 1,200 horsepower Allison single-stage, single-speed engine, but unlike the P-40, it had a little bit. It had to haul around a 200-pound 37mm cannon and all of its cannon ammunition in the nose, which gave it a little bit of high wing loading. He said it was a pretty tricky plane to fly. All P-39s/P-400s were pretty tricky planes to fly because of their high wing loadings. They could snap roll at a moment's notice, virtually at any kind of altitude or speed, whether high speed or low speed. And he says it was a tricky little plane to fly, but they're glad to have, to them, it was a very advanced plane, so they're glad to fly it. P-39 pilots in the Pacific never got as many kills as the P-38 pilots, simply because they could not fly as high or as far or as fast, but it was a good little plane. He says the P-39 performed best low altitude flights, carrying a bomb, in ground support missions. Actually, those were his favorite missions in his P-39N. The planes very rarely went over 12,000 feet. They go down, they'd bomb Japanese shore emplacements, or they supported the Australian Army and the U.S. Army fighting in New Guinea. It says the plane was perfectly acceptable for doing those missions, and the plane was really good at them. I think the U.S. Army really missed out. I think the P-39 should have become the America Stuka in North Africa and in the South Pacific, and later on in the Italy campaign, where when it was given these missions, it performed extremely well. It could never become a high-altitude fighter like the P-51 or the P-38 or the P-47, but because of the limitations of its engine, it could never, of course, do any of these jobs. So a little bit about Nanette. When he got assigned to the 41st Squadron in New Guinea, he kept on getting assigned to the same plane, number 74, which didn't have a name and already had a kill on it. Kill was gotten by Lieutenant Cardone, who unfortunately passed away. Was KIA in a later flight in a different plane when Nanette was not able to fly, which seemed to be a continuing source of amusement throughout the book. That any time that you could always tell when a serious mission was coming up, because Nanette would suddenly become unoperational. When during a fighter sweep one time to attack Japanese aircraft, when a raid was coming in, Nanette took off and they didn't spot any Japanese planes, and they came back and landed. The very next day, Nanette was scheduled to fly the next day, and they were about ready to scramble again, and this time Nanette had dropped all of the oil out of the engine. And this is a continuing theme with Nanette, and sure enough, Edward Parks was in a different P-39, this time a P-400 he had to be assigned to, and that plane got riddled by 7.7 millimeter machine gun bullets and 20 millimeter cannon bullets. So here's what he has to say about flying P-39 and Nanette. And then, as the flight proceeded, she would indicate in 100 ways that as long as it was going the way she wanted it to go, nice and straightforward, without any disgusting perversions like shooting off her guns at enemy planes, she would not only give me a good ride, but would thoroughly enjoy it herself. She would hum lightly as she danced through her maneuvers. Oh yes, perhaps she would be grumpy for half an hour, or she had the wing position of Badger. Badger was the squadron commander, and he tended to fly recklessly. And of course, Nanette did not enjoy flying like that, so she didn't like it. She would clear her throat testily as we crossed the mountain, but always on the way home safely out of range of the ubiquitous bandits of WoW. She would lose her nervousness and purr gently. So Nanette was pretty much a coward. Several other occasions when dangerous missions would be coming up, Nanette's carburetor would go out, or other bad things and unusual things would happen to the plane. Other pilots did not like to fly Nanette, so eventually Nanette became the sole responsibility of Edwards Parks. He flew it on numerous missions throughout the war, and poor Nanette met her demise in the South Pacific during a Japanese bombing raid, where she was cowering in her embankment and got plastered by a Japanese fragmentation bomb and got completely blown up. So, was the P-39 a war winner? No. Was poor Nanette a war winner? No. But if used properly to do things like ground support and escorting transport planes on short-range missions, it was a perfectly adequate fighter when used within its means. So I hope everybody has enjoyed this little video I've put together, and I'll try to put together a video tomorrow or next week. All right, bye-bye.